So Jared is in France this week, so it's just going to be me. So for this podcast, I thought, of course, we're gonna sit here silently for the next 30 minutes, and I hope you enjoy. We're not. I'm gonna read a story, depending on how long that takes. Probably should have timed it, but I started writing this on Thursday. The plan was to have a 4-part story of about 700 words each, but part 3 kind of turned into 3,500 words. I just kept writing. Help. So I'm going to finish part 4 next week. So I'll just read parts 1, 2, and 3, and then 4 will be later because writing. Blah. Anyway, this story is called A Reptile Dysfunction. It's a great joke, I know. Here we go. Let me go into my narration persona. Part 1. No, I'm not going to do that. That's too hard. Part 1. Desmond is sitting in the break room, his coffee mildly cold after having to deal with a small outbreak of sickly apes who got out of their containment and into the agricultural research compound. He would definitely be having a chat to the engineers about securing those damn climate vents. I swear it's always the air conditioning that breaks, he thinks. He takes a swift gulp of coffee. His eyelids batter at the less than appreciating taste. The door slides open. A young man wearing a new uniform is there. His uniform is not new in terms of design, it's new in production. He has a recently purchased non-second-hand uniform of the same design as Desmond's. The young man is tentative in appearance. Luggage is visible next to the door. Desmond eyes him and notices the lack of stains, patches, and general yellowing of his clothes. Breaks over. "Hello?" says the young man. Desmond ruffles himself upwards and makes towards the door. "Greetings there. Who are you and what sort of responsibility... Greetings there. Who are you and what sort of responsibilities am I now gracefully bestowed?" says Desmond. My name's Edward, and I guess I'm the new guy." "You guess? You either are or you aren't. What's your title, guy?" "Sorry, I'm the herpetologist. Just arrived. That flight was a real headache. I was instructed to find Desmond." Desmond lets out a short sigh. "Well, you've done your work. That is I. Now, buddy, Edward, Eddie, I'm having quite the time back here with my coffee, so if you could just go find your room, then we can both relax." "My room?" Desmond was caught turning around. He paused there for a time, his mouth making movements but no sound. Edward peeks in to see his face. "Okay, let's go," says Desmond abruptly. He leads Edward out and down the corridor, not giving him time to gather his suitcase and bags. "Come on, Eddie, I haven't got all day." Edward struggles with his luggage, but gets moving anyway. "What do you mean? It's already 9 p.m. "That's local time, Eddie. Local time." Desmond keeps walking faster than he should. "Dates and times don't really matter up here. We work when there's work and report when it's done. That's it." They pass by several empty dormitories. "So, when I say I haven't got all day, I actually haven't got any day. So hasten yourself." They walk past yet more rooms. Some are occupied. "Where are we going?" "As far away from my room as possible. You're new and unadjusted and a herpetologist. I don't want to hear you creeping or slithering around at night, because there is no night, and it takes time to get into the swing of things." Edward found that equal parts insulting and helpful. He said nothing, and continued instead. "Rise and shine, Ed." Desmond cut himself off as Edward's room was dimly lit and he was lying on his bed, reading, fully clothed. This confused Desmond. "Sleep okay?" he said insidiously. "Yeah, fine." Desmond couldn't figure out how to belittle Edward from this point. He felt awkward. He looked around the room. Everything was organized, but not to the point where it was weird. We dim a lot of the lights during the dark hours. Saves power, you know. Solar and all. Station's only resource. Edward looked up and nodded, not resting his book. Plus, we need to maintain the enclosure's lighting. Some creatures go crazy when you mess with their circadian rhythm. Isn't that part of the experiment? Not deliberately, but we always record what happens, you know, for research. Desmond's eyes make it to the small porthole window centered in the back of the room. Hell of a view, isn't it? Edward greatly agreed with this. The view was immense, terrifying, and utterly stunning. He had spent the good part of his time here staring at it during the light hours. Sure is. So... right. Why am I here? Well, I came to wake you up, but that wasn't needed, so we'll just start the tour. Really? I didn't think you were the tour kind of guy. I'm an efficient kind of guy, Eddie, and I don't want you coming up and asking where whatever is or what access level is needed and can I borrow your key every 15 minutes. We're going to get past all of that right now. Ready? Edward marks his book and stands up. Great. Let's go. That's just the end of the part. I'm going to take a drink to flap my lips because they're a bit dry. Oh, so refreshing. Here we go, part 2! The wind is still howling. It's been like that for 3 days now. Ice has started to vignette the windows. The natural light is cool and faded. Varro is checking his stock to make sure he can survive if the power goes out. He's surprised it hasn't, and this weather continues. Crates of materials and parts line his workshop. A great assortment of tools and devices hang well organized on a concrete wall adjacent to his arc solderer and sturdy multi-surfaced workbench. It is 2 months since his last contact with Paladin. That kind of time away from a part of yourself causes minds to deteriorate. Varro often found himself frozen, not because of the weather, because he was stuck waiting for a response from himself. It's like someone had ripped out part of his own brain and signals just drove off the road and were lost forever. Eventually, he'd time himself out and snap back to reality. That could sometimes take minutes, but was timeless to Varro. Varro had been working tirelessly on his new Simlink enhancement. The damaged one could not be salvaged after the crash. Those damn skycab drivers, he says, and they thought outlawing AI was going to protect the people. Great idea. I'm one of the people and I didn't feel protected, not in the fucking slightest. Varro thought back to the crash. The severing of his Simlink was something he never wanted to experience again. He wouldn't wish that fate upon anybody, even the driver, but he was dead, so that was probably a much nicer experience. His thoughts moved to Paladin, as they often did. Where did you go? He thought. He could feel himself slipping into paralyzing confusion. No, he shouted at the floor, his breathing heavy. I've got to finish this. He grabbed his las pen and began inscribing circuits onto the Simlink device. Varro's workshop looks stale, like nobody has done anything there for years. A well-worn mattress rests upon the pallets in the corner. He had started living there after the authorities back on his home planet, Fen, had determined his work produced questionable motives. Then the ban on Caliber 2 artificial intelligence and above made progress for the sake of progress quite illegal for him. They cut any funding he had and threatened confinement and the seizing of his assets. The next planet over from Fen was Forsyth, a very cold and very unpopulated moon-sized planet boasting boundless plains of glorious white fields of ice and snow. Varro made his choice. Civilian life here didn't suit him. He sold as much as he could, got in contact with someone willing to get him there, and jumped ship. Several hours passed as Varro works on his invention, switching tools and procedures every so often. He doesn't eat, he only drinks water from his canteen. He periodically attaches the Simlink to the side of his head on a shaved section just back from the ear, where the tissue becomes swishy, and evaluates its progress. It isn't the most comfortable thing to wear, but he'll work on that later. It still needs more calibration for the entangled particles to operate. Varro is exhausted. He decides to eat, finally, before beginning the initial trial of his newly complete Simlink. He sits there, eating some bland food from a can with an indecipherable label. He pops 2 pills out of a bottle, crushes them, and mixes them in a metal mug with water from his canteen. Varro needs those essential vitamins to keep healthy in the icy desert. He fills his canteen at the basin, drinks the entire thing, then refills it. He sits down by the workbench. His eyes wander over the mess he has created. He spots a prototype blink engine him and Paladin had been working on before they set off to Fen to sell a simlink to an interested party in Kavar City. He picks up the octagonal disc and associated glove and places them carefully on a shelf. Varro sits back down and stares at the simlink. He keeps staring at it. He has started to get used to being alone. He doesn't even know if Paladin is alive. Part of him desperately wants to know, and another wants to move on. Now that the simlink is complete, he's not sure if he can go through with connecting up again. The severing was intense, and it scares him deeply. Varro throws a cover over the workbench and falls on his mattress. His mind is racing, but a finish line doesn't exist. He tries to sleep, but that isn't working. The wind still howls, and Varro lays there, eyes wide, in his bed, grasping the simlink. Another drink of water. It's so dry. Blah, 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 blah. That's real good. I like drinking water, that is. Don't be an alcoholic. You'll ruin your liver, probably. Anyway, let's get into the third part. This one is like wildly longer than the rest, so I don't know. It just happened. Here we go. And this is where you'll be spending most of your time, I imagine. The Reptile Sanctuary, announces Desmond. He then grabs his radio and starts transmitting over the PA system. So that wraps up the tour of a lovely dwelling here, Merc 7 International Space Station for Biological Research. Currently orbiting the planet Fen at a height of 1,088 kilometers above the planet's surface. We conduct the studying of all flora and fauna of Fen with the effects and conditions of outer space. I'm sure you're all a bit exhausted after our space expedition. It was out of this world, so please grab a space coffee and cake at our space cafe, and don't forget to check out the space gift shop for all kinds of useless, overpriced space shit. I've been your space tour guide, Desmond. Please fill out a space visitor survey on your space flight home and have a lovely... Okay, we're in space. I get it. Desmond chuckles. It's not often we get someone new up here. I'm making as much out of it as I can. Get off the hair on my screen. Yeah, alright, fair enough. Why is that? Eddie, come on, that's the kind of person I am. No, I mean, why aren't there many people up here? Budget cuts. That's it? Yeah, I guess. The Fen Society... I guess the Fen Science Initiative doesn't see much benefit in putting different kinds of monkeys into orbit, Desmond says, and seems to partly agree with. Plus, their funding was utterly slashed under the new conservative regime. Huh, I guess I was pretty lucky to get a position here then, eh? Desmond stares quizzically with a hint of disappointment back at Edward. What? Edward says defensively. Here's your keys. Desmond throws a small set of keys to Edward. Don't lose them. Thanks. Anyway, there's a bunch of projects that FSI have sent through on the dashboard over there. Desmond gestures to a large screen with a keyboard and extra knobs and dials. There's a bit of a backlog since our previous herpetologist fell into a water dragon tank and... excuse me. There's a bit of a backlog since our previous herpetologist fell into a water dragon tank and drowned. A look of concern washes over Edward. I'm just kidding. We don't have a water dragon up here. Too heavy. But she did die. Edward grimaces. Well, good luck, Desmond says, and quickly turns and leaves. Edward stands there, lightly stunned. He looks at the keys in his hand. There's a fob for logging into the system. He heads over to the dashboard, presses it to the contact point, and looks through some of the projects. Overwhelmed by the depth and detail of work to do, Edward decides to get to know the reptile sanctuary on a more intricate level. He begins walking past some of the tanks and enclosures. Turtles, snakes, lizards, frogs, though not exactly reptiles, amphibians are under the concern of herpetologists too, and some strange crocodile-like vertebrae about the size and dimensions of a hand. They look a bit like a squashed lizard. Between the corridors of enclosures was an access lane so engineers could fix any issues such as climate or structural changes. Edward thinks he probably won't go back there. There was a control panel under each enclosure to view and adjust the differences in environment. It also displays medical and neurological information about the creatures, and scientific information about the species, including details from where and when they were captured. Edward stops in front of one of the lizard tanks. Caryonus silotus, shrub lizard, is displayed on the panel. These lizards range from 20 to 30 centimeters in length, about the size of a forearm, and as the name suggests, prefer shrublands as their natural environment. There are 3 shrub lizards in the tank: a mass of plant matter, a dead branch, a small water hole, and a heated lamp that cycles akin to their sun back on Fen. A shrub lizard's diet mainly consists of plants and insects, but larger males are known to eat small birds and rodents if they can catch them. Insects are much easier to foster on the station, so that's all they'll get for live meals. Shrub lizards have a rare ability to change their sex depending on environmental conditions. Edward watches the lizards for a time. One is particularly intriguing. The lizard, according to the control panel, is Caryonus silotus, number 003, CS3. The lizard, CS3, is consistently exploring every facet and crevice of the tank. It then starts collecting bits of shrub and places them in a pile next to the water. CS3 lays on the pile of plant mass, but then starts climbing the dead branch that rises through the center of the tank. Once scrambling to the peak of the branch, CS3 steadies itself and leaps off. Edward is taken back by the marvelous display. CS3 lands on the shrub pile below and is unharmed by the fall. Edward is utterly fascinated by this point. CS3 does it again, this time jumping higher, it seems. After making it back up the branch, CS3 makes the jump once again, but this time it grasps the edge of the heat lamp, scrambles up above it, and bites the cord. The heat lamp fades, falls, and shatters at the water's edge. Edward flinches as the tank is plunged into darkness. What the shit? Edward pauses for a second, trying to think of what to do. He leaves the sanctuary and heads towards the central lab. "Desmond," Edward says as he enters. Desmond is busy preparing some samples to be sent back to Fen. He places glass containers and microscope slides in a nanotube shell, a small spherical casing used as a cheap and mostly indestructible vessel that gets launched back to the planet's surface. He finishes placing the last few items into the sphere, twists it, then places it on a device that seems to seal it all up and check for defects. He then slowly turns his chair to face Edward. "Yes? One of the shrub lizards just climbed up onto the heat lamp and smashed it into the ground," says Edward cautiously. Desmond rubs his hands into his face. "Go and find Sav. She'll be able to sort this out, probably." "Cool, great, where can I find her?" "I was getting to that. Most likely in the aquarium." "Well, not in the aquarium. You know what I mean. Any excuse for her to look at fish." "Thanks," Edward says as he shifts himself out the door. "Oh, Eddie, you've used flabbergas before?" Edward looks at him, puzzled. "Neuralis fiber gas." "Oh, yeah, many times, don't worry." Edward disappears. What do they even teach at the Institute anymore, thinks Desmond. Just gonna grab some more water. Don't mind me. Just gonna... hydration. Life-giving liquid. It's good. It's real good. Here we go. Thomson whales are quite small as whales go. About the size of a dolphin. This one is happy swimming around in its tank, 1,000 kilometers above its natural habitat. Sav is feeding large shrimp-like creatures to it as it flows around her, blowing bubbles and making happy whale noises. She floats centered in the tank full of cold water. She's wearing a full-body wetsuit and flippers. She spins with the Thomson whale, playing and dancing. She looks out of the tank and sees Edward standing uncomfortably behind the glass. Edward does a little wave, and Sav makes her way out of the tank. "What can I do for you? It's Edward, right?" Sav says, toweling off her body. Edward goes to speak, but catches himself when he sees Sav's legs. She wasn't wearing a full-body wetsuit. Her legs were robotic, along with her left arm. Embarrassment falls upon Edward. He hadn't noticed this when she was introduced on the tour. Her clothes had that covered. Pretty cool, right? They did a good job fixing me up. Even got waterproofing and these sweet flippers. It is. They did. Very cool, Edward says awkwardly. Thanks, Sav responds. Now, what do you need me to do? Well, if you got time, Edward, it's fine. My job is basically cleaning up your messes. Edward smiles. One of the heat lamps got smashed in the shrub lizard tank. No problem. I'll meet you there in 5. Sav walks away, still drying her hair, and Edward heads back to the reptile sanctuary. Edward is staring into the dark tank, trying to see the lizards. The coating on the glass only lets light out, but not in. This the one? Sav says, startling Edward as she appears from around the corner. Yep. Great. Flabbergas him and I'll get in there and replace the thing. You've got somewhere to put the little guys? Yeah, I found this portable tank in the office. Should do the trick. Edward hits up the control panel and releases the Neuralis fiber gas into the tank. He waits 30 seconds. Okay, should be good, Edward yells as he jogs around the back to where Sav had gone. Gas is wafting out of the access panel as Edward nears it. He stops at a distance as to not breathe anything in. Sav reappears through the gas wearing a breathing apparatus and with 3 limp lizards in her hands. She hands them to Edward. Go make sure these guys are comfortable. I'll finish up here, says a muffled voice from behind the mask. Oh, and could you turn off the gas, please? Yes, sorry. Edward and the small container of paralyzed lizards make their way to the control panel. Blah. He turns off the gas and takes the container and places it next to the dashboard at the front of the sanctuary. He starts reading through the projects again, taking mental notes as he looks forward to getting some work done. A few minutes pass. Sav comes through and says... Sav comes through the... spelling mistake. Sav comes through and says that since the wires were ripped apart, she'd have to spend a bit more time on it. Those guys gonna be okay in there? Sav says, looking at the lizards. Yeah, I'll get them something to eat. Good, because they won't be ready to go back until you wake up next. Edward nods in agreement. Having a pet is a big responsibility. You gotta look after it. You gotta feed it. And most importantly, you gotta love and nurture it. Do you think you're ready for that kind of responsibility? You gotta be a big boy now. Yes, Miss Savannah, says Edward with a drone, thoroughly enjoying the sarcastic roleplay. Okay, good, says Sav, trying not to laugh as she leaves to... No, Google, don't... I'm happy you're happy. What the Google, no! Sorry about that. Edward thinks he will enjoy the dynamic up here. Sav and Desmond remind him of his parents, and the environment is a welcome change from university and the other jobs he has had. He supposes being so isolated from society, yet so closely involved with a select few, would be like living in a big family. Edward soon realizes that he is immensely tired. Desmond was right. He decides to go rest a while and let Sav do her thing. Before leaving, he grabs some nasty-smelling food and lets the lizards have at it. The lizards would much prefer some live insects, but he doesn't have the energy for that. Edward passes by Desmond in the lab on the way to his room. Sav sorted out for you? Desmond asks. Yeah, she's working on it. How did you manage to break something already? Hey, it wasn't me. CS3, one of the shrub lizards, climbed up a branch and smashed it itself. You're joking. Nope. The lizard has some weird agenda and the intelligence to go through with it. I highly doubt that, but sure, why not? Edward gesticulates his indifference with a shrug and continues off to bed. Oh, water. Talking is hard. Oh shit, 24 minutes already. What the hell? This is a long one. This is a story. It just keeps going. And it'll end on a cliffhanger because I haven't written the last part yet. Like I know what's gonna happen. I just ran out of time because part 3 went forever. Here we go. Edward wakes during the dark hours. He's only been asleep for 7, so it is probably still a few hours until natural light is blessed upon the station. He quietly gets dressed and heads out. He enters the reptile sanctuary and checks the tank. Sav seems to have fixed everything. Edward tests the heat lamp by messing with the control panel. It works as expected. He grabs the lizard container. One of the lizards is looking particularly bloated, and all the food has been eaten. Minor concern crosses Edward, but nothing to worry about yet. He places the container in the tank, heads back to the control panel, and turns on the gas. He quickly runs over to the wall and grabs a mask. I like breathing, he jokes to himself. Back in the tank, he opens the container and stares at the still creatures. Poor little guys, he thinks. He extracts a lizard and puts it down, then grabs the bloated one. As soon as his hand is out of the container, the lizard comes to life and bites a finger. Gah! The bite had broken the skin, but nothing too bad. The lizard drops as Edward retracts his hand from the beast. He watches as it scampers out of the tank and seems to disappear entirely. He scrunches his face, then looks out. No sign of it. Filled with annoyance, he pokes the other lizards. Nothing. They only breathe. He packs up the container and seals the tank. He begins stealthily wandering the corridor, looking down each aisle to catch a glimpse of the escapee. Again, nothing. He heads back to the control panel. The two other lizards were starting to reanimate from paralysis. His suspicions were right. The display only exhibits CS7 and CS4. What is this lizard, he thinks. Morning, Ed, Desmond says with enthusiastic irony, entering the break room. There's no mornings here, Edward replies, looking totally spent and splayed out on the couch. That's the spirit. Desmond begins making coffee. You know, I requested... Jesus Christ. You know, I requested a specific type of bean and new coffee grinder to be sent up on the next shipment. Fuck. Desmond says, but all I got was you and the same old shit that's been here since day one. You'd think I would have gotten used to it. I lost a lizard, Edward says softly. I mean, I've been up here for 3 years. You think FSI would have some sort of rewards program or something? I should be a platinum member by now. I lost a lizard, Edward repeats with greater emphasis. I'm a simple guy, right? All I ask is to have some nice coffee from the Kafar plantation, preferably Circos, and to look after space monkeys. Desmond! The water splashes and bursts as it reaches boiling point. The kettle clicks. The raging liquid fizzles to a calm and steamy disposition. Silence returns to the room. Desmond sighs and stares at the ground. There's no point searching for it. It will either die or we'll get it back with the traps you are going to set, Desmond says calmly and confidently. Are there security cameras that we can monitor? Only cameras are for some of the enclosures, and one's for video logs. Desmond finishes making his coffee and decides to leave, letting Edward work things out, and before he tells him anything else that's gone wrong. It has been 40 hours since CS3 escaped. Edward had laid bait out to lure the thing and catch it. None have been successful. He has talked to most of the crew, and none of them have seen anything. Most of them just laughed. Edward and Desmond are sitting in the break room eating some crisps when Desmond's radio starts up. Edward can't hear it from this distance. We'll be right there, Desmond transmits back. We'll be right there, Desmond transmits back, sheathing the radio. God damn it, he shouts, getting up from his seat. Edward jolts upright. What is it? Those nasty little fuckers have got out again. Sorry, monkeys. Edward follows Desmond as he furiously power walks to the incident. Slow the rotation, he yells at one of the engineers as he dons a more protective set of clothing. Edward feels himself getting lighter as the outer ring structure of the station reduces its angular velocity. They have entered low gravity. The monkeys can't seem to navigate properly in this condition. Desmond grabs a literal bag and launches himself around in the next room, snatching up monkeys and securing them back in the enclosure. That looks fun, Edwin says as Desmond returns. It's a fucking nightmare, that's what it is, he responds. I thought I told you guys to check the damn enclosures when this happened the other day, Desmond yells at the engineers. There are no days here, says Edwards. Shut up, Eddie, Desmond shouts, now staring angrily back at him. Edward instantly regrets his words. We did, responds one of the engineers, self-assured. We checked all of them. This shouldn't have been able to happen. Yet here we stand, Desmond rebuts. The station starts revolving faster. It feels like going up in an elevator, but soon gravity returns to a standard level. Desmond trudges off. Edward follows not too far behind. He finds Desmond at a dashboard looking through footage of the incidental enclosure. "This is not the most standard induction I've had for a job," Edward says, trying to lighten the mood again. "No, you don't get to talk. You can't take care of one fucking lizard, and the rest of these blistering idiots can't even secure an ape enclosure." Edward once again untactfully digs himself a hole. He goes to leave. "Don't leave. Sit there." Desmond blindly points at a chair near the other desk. Several minutes pass as Desmond scrubs through footage. Edward remains quiet. "You, here." Edward cautiously makes his way to the dashboard. "Now, what does that look like to you?" Desmond asks, pointing at the screen. Edward leans in and notices what Desmond must be referring to. A vent is being pushed out from the inside, and when it falls, a fat little lizard is visible for a second, then runs back away. "What the hell?" says Edward. Desmond scrubs back through some other footage. In it, CS3 is visible tugging along a nanotube sample shell. "What is it doing with that?" exclaims Edward. "I told you this lizard was smart." "I don't know what to say," Desmond replies, clearly too astonished to be angry with Edward anymore. Edward feels a change in momentum. A pen on the desk starts rolling to the right. Then the acceleration rightwards increases. "What the fuck is going on?" says Desmond. The whole station is rotating. CS3 jumps off the main controls when it is aligned correctly. The lizard heads to the courier room where it placed the nanotube shell. It sets the sphere on the preparation device. It struggles to twist the shell, but it gives. CS3 jumps into the compact vessel. The machine secures and seals the sphere. It then rolls down into the launch barrel. A small charge is heard cycling upwards. Various flaps and covers open and close. Then the shell, and hence the lizard, is fired into outer space with a satisfying thunk. To be continued. And that's the majority of A Reptile Dysfunction by yours truly. Part 4 will wrap up this little wrap it up with a conclusion, and that'll most likely be next week unless it turns into a novel and a half as well. That actually filled half an hour. I thought it would only go for about 20 minutes, but cool. That's pretty much it. Yeah, that's the end. If you enjoyed the story, great. I mean, it's not finished, but if you enjoy cliffhangers, great. Cool. Blah, 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 blah.